You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello, my beautiful listeners, and welcome to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Lance Morgan. Today I'm excited because we have Antoine Wilson to talk about his new book, Mouth to Mouth. Antoine Wilson is the author of the novels Panorama City and The Interloper. His work has appeared in the Paris Review, Story Quarterly, Best New American Voices, and the Los Angeles Times, among other publications, and he is a contributing editor of A Public Space. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a recipient of the Carol Hoke Smith Fiction Fellowship from the University of Wisconsin, he lives in Los Angeles. Antoine, welcome.
Hi, Lance. Thank you.
Did I pronounce that fellowship name right?
Yes.
Carol. Yes. Perfect. Win for me.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Staying warm in this weird LA cold front that we're having.
I know. I got waylaid in New York recently because of an actual blizzard.
Oh, wow.
I was just looking out the window of my hotel, and the snow was going by sideways.
Oh, wow.
But you bundle up and you know what to expect when you go outside. This has been weird here.
I'm not prepared for it here. What's a blizzard like? I forgot those days. Blizzards.
Yeah, I know, right?
My friend and his partner are going up to the mountains to see some snow, and I'm just like, oh wow, yeah, snow. I forgot it's that time of the year where snow happens.
I do like it though when you go outside and it's like 20. But you're prepared, you're bundled, but you just feel that bracing, like, zip. We should do this whole podcast about the weather. People tuned in to hear about books. It's just us talking about the weather.
I feel like it'd be a good change of pace,
Yeah. Have you ever seen a water spout?
No, I please tell me.
So I saw one, I was a kid and I was in Bermuda. And there was this squall coming through, and a water spout is just like a little cyclone, a tornado, but it is on the water. So this thing was just out in the Hamilton Sound or whatever, and it was just this tornado on the water, and it sucks water up into it, and then it springs out of the top like a sprinkler.
Oh my God!
It's beautiful.
Was it like close enough that you were like felt the effects of it, or was it just like way out?
No, it was pretty close, but I didn't feel the effects of it. And I also figured it, I don't know, I was a kid, but I figured we were in no danger because for some reason I felt like, a tornado couldn't possibly go from the water to the land. Yeah. But I think that's inaccurate. I think they just come ripping right through no matter what's under them.
I feel like, it's probably more dangerous, but a water tornado, something about that sounds cool. I feel like that's the natural sequel of the Twister movie franchise.
Oh, totally. Waterworld meets Twister.
Hollywood, we're ready. Get us in a room, we can pitch it. Even though I could talk about this all day, I'm excited to. I feel you have a reading that you would like to share from us.
Sure. Yeah. So this novel is called Mouth to Mouth, and essentially, what happens is this is there's an unnamed narrator. He's on his way. He's a sort of schlubby writer. He's on his way to Berlin to try to capitalize on a magazine calling him a cult writer over there. And while he's waiting at JFK on a flight delay, he bumps into somebody that he knew in college almost 2 decades earlier. And this guy, Jeff Cook, is now a famous or very successful art dealer. And Jeff Cook invites our narrator up to the first class lounge and tells him the sort of story of his rise in the since college in the art world. And that story begins with Jeff saving somebody from drowning on the beach in Santa Monica. So this is Jeff, and he's just a little bit out of college. He's been broken up with. He's heartbroken. He's at the beach at sort of pre-dawn, at dawn. And he sees this guy, one arm sort of goes up as this guy's swimming, and then he's just floating there. So he's got to decide what to do. So here's Jeff on the beach. He hadn't yet faced a moment like this in his life, one in which he knew with certainty that the crisis at hand was his alone to deal with, one during which he wished for the intercession of the God he didn't believe in, or anyone who might know what to do, or even someone as clueless and panicked as himself who could, by their presence, share the burden. It was one of those crucial moments, one which, when reflected on, wouldn't be laughed off, but would send a chill up his spine. Because even if he felt that he had no choice, that anyone would have done what he did in that situation, he would have to acknowledge that he was being tested. Because in truth, he could have given up, could have despaired, could have walked away, could have pretended he hadn't seen what he'd seen, could have subtracted himself from the scenario, told himself that he wasn't even there, that he'd left a moment too early or arrived a moment too late, that the predicament had not in fact fallen in his lap, but only grazed him as it passed, undisturbed and unaddressed, left to unfold by itself as nature might have intended. I pointed out that one's interceding or not could equally represent fate, that letting nature take its course could include any number of interventions, since we ourselves were inseparable from nature. He considered this for a moment, seemed about to reply, and sipped his beer instead. The water was so cold, he continued, after he'd polished off the beer and fetched another, that it took his breath away. He felt like he was unable to get enough air into his lungs. Nevertheless, he made for the body, stomping through the shallows in his underwear and t-shirt, and then swimming, thinking that the man was probably okay, that he was being foolish, that the man would pop his head up at any moment and bring an end to what forever would become an embarrassing story about Jeff's tendency to jump to conclusions, to act before considering consequences. These thoughts alternated round robin with others, equally powerful and clear, that this man was dead, and had been dead a long time and was only drifting to shore. But hadn't he seen an arm slap the water? The cold bit into his hands and feet, and though he swam with his head up, he tasted seawater with every stroke. When he reached the body, he hesitated to touch it. What if it sprang to life and dragged him down with the last of its energy, as drowning people were said to do? He took hold of his shoulder and tried to flip the man onto his back, but without being able to touch the bottom, he couldn't get the leverage he needed. He grabbed the man's hand and towed him the short distance to shore, swimming an awkward one-armed breaststroke, scanning the beach for anyone he could call on for help. At the inshore ditch, he went underwater and shoved the body from below, using a ripple of swell to propel it onto the sand. It rolled, came to a rest on its back, limbs folded awkwardly as if it had fallen from a height. He stood before it, a middle-aged man in a slick swimmer's wetsuit, tinted goggles, bluish skin, purple lips. He had thought of him as both a he and an it, a man and a body. But now the form on the sand had resolved into a human being, a he, definitively. No sign of breathing, and he had no idea how to take a pulse. He didn't dare remove the goggles for fear of revealing eyes wide open but unseeing. I'll stop there.
I mean, I feel like that was a great lead in to the story. Thank you for sharing with us.
My pleasure.
No problem. So I wanted to start our conversation with just like the question that came to my mind first was, what led to this story? What for you? What was the conception of the story for you?
Well, it's been percolating, brewing a long time. If I were to go back, well, I've always been interested in the sort of relationship between rescuers and people they rescue, and the sort of weird ways that things can play out between people set up in that kind of situation or thrown together in that way. My father was an orthopedic surgeon. I was
same.
Oh wow,
yeah,
cool,
crazy.
I was pre-med, and I considered going to medical school, and I was an EMT in college. So I don't know. I was just around that kind of stuff. But the seed is probably I was in Seattle in 1997 visiting with a couple of friends, and we were down by the waterfront. I think it was Fleet Week or whatever they call it, where the Navy's there. We were wandering around, and this guy was walking along, air drumming, and not really looking where he was going. And he was basically about to step into the path of a freight train that was coming through the area. And so I got his attention and then managed to get him to stop just in time. And so he's standing there, and this full-size freight train just goes right past him. And he just looked at me like eyes wide open and was like, "Oh my God, you saved my life." And then he said, "I'm going to buy you a big steak dinner." Yeah. And then the train finished going by, and he just kept air drumming down the waterfront, and he never to return. So, my friends made fun of me for never getting my steak dinner, for saving this guy's life. But that was where I started, probably about 10 years ago, when I was noodling with different possible ideas for what was coming next. And I was playing with, I changed it to a drowning. I'm a surfer. I love the water. I'm just interested in that kind of, that kind of environment. And initial drafts was, this guy saves a guy, and he offers him a steak dinner. But then how many steak dinners is a life worth? Which, it wasn't a very good story, but it did lead me toward what ended up being Mouth to Mouth.
And how many steak dinners is a life worth? Now I'm going to sit with that question. I feel like the answer is, maybe one a day. Is that enough? Does that seem like enough? One steak dinner a day.
Well, until you choke on the steak.
Well, I mean,
then the life is given back.
Or like, I feel like for your heart, that's not great. So maybe, the steak dinner is not, you'll get like maybe a good dozen, and then maybe 2 dozen, and then it's not looking good.
And I think one of the things that was going on there was I was looking at, that sort of relationship, because the rescuer in that first draft of things would say, "Oh, that was great. Let's do it again next week." And he was sort of this weird spongy guy who was hanging on to the guy he rescued and getting steak dinners out of him. And then, from the other side, it's a very strange thing to owe somebody your life, and you kind of want to get rid of that person. You kind of you appreciate them for the fact that you're still alive, but you also want to get rid of that obligation because it's an impossible obligation to erase.
Well, it seems like, is it also like a reminder of, like, your own mortality there too?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's you don't want to be reminded that, of this not great time where it almost ended. It almost ended. Yeah. And that probably is a reminder. I mean, do you think you made your main character Jeff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Jeff, do you think you made Jeff like a person to like in your story, a person to like, a hero kind of character?
Not necessarily. I mean, Jeff he's the protagonist, right? I mean, he's the guy who goes on the journey, right? Out of this sort of sad post-collegiate, not having a clue what he's going to do, and then he has this moment that turns out to sort of be like one of fate's forks. This thing is what sends him on the path that he'll take for the rest of his life. Jeff's an interesting character. He's telling the story to the narrator, and so he's painting a self-portrait that is fairly self-justifying. And I think, one of the questions of the novel is how much of that is conscious? How much is he consciously sort of retelling his story, rewriting his story, and how much of it is just his reluctance to acknowledge his darker side, his ambition, his privilege, all the things that led him to where he is.
Right.
So I think Jeff on balance, he saves somebody's life, but the guy who saves is kind of a jerk. I don't know if that's part of the moral calculation of the book, sort of whether Jeff's like a good guy.
No, I mean, his character reminds me of like this protagonist, this, as you said, this like privileged kind of like person looking for like their next step in their path.
Mhm.
It reminded me of like the protagonist in Townsend Mr. Ripley, or
Mhm.
Catch Me If You Can. That privileged white guy who's from like a who's like trying to figure out what's next for him, but he's not thinking about others around him or the
Yeah.
consequences of it either. And
Yeah.
it
And
seemed
Ripley, I saw Purple Noon. I didn't
mhm,
see the movie or the Matt Damon one, and I didn't read the book. But from what I understand, Ripley's a bit more of a sociopath. Um, and he's just calculating. Catch Me If
right,
You Can. I think he's just a little bit more of a con. But
right.
Jeff, I mean, Jeff. The thing is, you can read Jeff as a sociopath. You can read this book in that way, and it totally works.
Mhm,
I've left it open, an open sort of question as to who Jeff is at his core. But I tend to think of him as someone who's almost unintentionally uh, participating in a con, of who he is. So
mhm.
sort of on that line of how much is he aware of participating in his own sort of self fashioning and
Right.
and moral, morally questionable moves.
And like, I mean, it also feels like, something anyone could experience at any time, you
Mm-hmm.
that like chance, that lightning striking, and taking advantage of it. And that kind of feels relatable because I feel like almost everyone has a moment, whether not maybe to this level, but everyone has an experience where once in their life, maybe, where like something they didn't expect to happen happens, and do they take that opportunity to like cash in on it, to make
Yeah.
it, to take it what they should. And sometimes you don't, not everyone does, because of maybe certain reasons, who they are. But like the fantasy of what could be, that's what I feel like the character of Jeff you know he takes that chance. He
He
says,
does. I think if it
yeah,
happened to me, I would be reluctant to take the chance because of that. I just feel like that life-saving aspect of it is so
yeah,
something that I'd want to just be free from. It's too entangled with
it's
somebody who I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah.
right,
But I mean, part of the sort of spine of Jeff's entering the art world comes from my own experience post UCLA. The first
mm-hmm,
job that I had was working for a fine art appraiser, and
mm-hmm,
I got that in Beverly Hills, and I got that job off the job board. The
mm-hmm,
index cards
yeah,
at the job office at UCLA, and I went for the job because it was a fine art and rare book appraiser, and I wanted to write
mm-hmm,
books, and I'm just was just enough of a doofus to like not go get an internship at a magazine or even work in a bookstore, right? Like this job like had nothing to do with writing books, and maybe 5% of the work was even appraising books. But
mm-hmm,
it, getting that job and working there and sort of sticking with it is how I learned basically everything I know about contemporary and post-war art, and I gained a real appreciation for it, even as I also looked at everything with a price tag attached, which felt very strange. That mixture of commerce and real appreciation. But
yeah,
that's one of the forks for me, right? Was getting that job. It's not a dramatic, it's not an ocean rescue. And
mm-hmm,
I didn't become a fine art appraiser. If I had, I could look back and say that was the moment.
yeah,
But it's a fairly serendipitous type of thing.
mm-hmm,
Um, and I could have just as easily gotten a job working somewhere else that would have resulted in a different novel 30, almost 30 years later, 25 years later, or whatever it is, right?
right.
So that's what I think of when I think of like fate's forks. Like I think of fate as sort of the way that we repackage our serendipity,
Mm-hmm,
from the past, the
yeah.
way that we create the narrative of our own lives.
But in with this novel, do you think that there is a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? There's some sort of like mixture of fate and, fate and seizing opportunity. There's a better word for that I can't think of. But yeah, seizing the opportunity and making,
Yeah.
squeezing as much out of it as you can.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it feels like a teacher once told me, like, you have to, like, lightning does strike, but the best thing to do is like put down as many lightning rods as possible so you get like the perfect thing.
Right.
And that's what this kind of feels like. Lightning rod,
Yeah.
a person who lightning did strike for him like this moment, but he like was like, okay, but I'm going to take it.
Take.
And like
Yeah.
it's interesting because from his perspective, we're not seeing it from the person who's traumatized's perspective.
Mhm.
um we're seeing it from the person who saved that life, who, and so how do you think how was it writing a character who's, responding to trauma from that side of it?
Do you mean Francis, the
Oh
guy he
no, Jeff.
saves? Oh, Jeff. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
Jeff.
Jeff is weirdly traumatized by the saving, right? Because
Right.
he feels like he's got a gun to his head,
Mhm.
essentially, like he's got to save this guy if he's moral at all. And
Yeah.
then a guy goes, that after he's resuscitated him, he goes off in the ambulance, and Jeff's just left with the wool blanket on the beach.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so he's got to process all this stuff, and he doesn't quite know how. But yeah, there is something to Jeff where he um, doesn't sort of want to admit his own canniness and his own ambition along the way in terms of all the opportunities that he does seize. And
Mhm.
even sort of mild spoiler when he's dating Chloe, who is the Francis Arsenault, the art gallery owner's daughter. you
Mhm.
know he like makes sure that no, like I really like this girl before I found out who she was, and
Mhm.
it's like all this stuff just sort of fell into my lap, as I went
Yeah.
along. And it's like all about him being, or trying to present himself as like a very good, very lucky kind of guy,
Right.
which is, a narrative that is suspect, to say the
Yeah.
least. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the morality of it too. Could we talk about how, like, is it a moral is what he did, moral, ethically, like is he taking advantage of the traumatic situation, as we said? Is that moral? Is that ethically sound? Is that, because for when I think about it, I'm like, he's not doing, he did a good thing. Shouldn't he be rewarded for the good thing he did? But also, is
Mhm.
he taking advantage of a situation that he is really shouldn't be a part of? Like,
Yeah.
he didn't, like, he yeah, it's a tricky situation there.
Yeah, especially because of the way he tells it, right? The way he tells it
Right.
is, oh, I just wanted to find out who I saved, right? Like I
Right.
wasn't going to him to say, I saved your life, give me a reward.
Right.
Um, but then there was a help wanted sign. So I was like, okay, well, why not?
Right.
But it's, but as the narrator says at one point, like when he finally has a chance to, I think it's when he goes to the restroom and actually has a chance to stop and think about the story he's hearing. He's like, this could just very easily be described as stalking
Yeah.
somebody. Like if you take it, you take these sort of beats, these story beats.
Right.
So yeah, and Jeff, there's a moment where Jeff feels like, I won't spoil it, but he does feel like, wait a second, maybe I am taking my reward and I'm not aware of it. And it
Hmm.
really just messes with his head.
I mean,
And
yeah.
yet, that he might have had that one moment of being actually right.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing the whole time. Part of, and yet I don't like to think of him as a sort of sociopath or a con man, because
Hmm.
his condition, to me, is meant to be the human condition, just our natural inability to plumb our own motives a lot of the time anyway. Uh, we have this wonderful function in our brains called the left brain interpreter, and
Hmm.
it creates language to explain what we're doing and what we've done, and it
Mhm.
doesn't care about truth. It
Mhm.
it only cares about plausibility, right? So
Right.
there was I think in the 70s there were these split brain experiments where people
Mhm.
had epilepsy and they had their corpus callosum cut, which is the thing that connects the left brain and the right brain. And
Mhm.
they did all these great split brain experiments. And in one of them, they'd show just the right side of the brain. Basically, they divide the visual field, so only one side
Mhm.
sees the same thing. They show the right side of the brain the word walk, and the right side of the brain can read that command,
Right.
but can't speak. It has really no voice. So that's over on the left side. So these people would read walk on the right side of the brain, then they get up from the table
Mhm.
and like they're going to go walk, and the scientist says, "Where are you going? Why did you get up to walk?" And they said, "Oh, I just wanted to go grab a Coke." And it's like, well,
Yeah.
we know the reason that they got up is not because they wanted to go get a Coke. That's left brain interpreter querying the brain. Like, why did we get up? Okay, what about
Yeah.
this?
Right.
So it's a tiny little, I mean, that's where to me, that's at the core of like why to write an unreliable narrator. My
Mhm.
first book had an unreliable narrator. I love Nabokov's unreliable narrators. Remains of the Day is a great Ishiguro
Yeah.
unreliable narrator. People, it's our inability to know ourselves is to me like a constant theme, and so Jeff is enacting
Mhm.
that to a
Mhm.
certain degree, and I think doing it in a way that's kind of entertaining for the reader also
I
as a
mean,
novel.
I feel like the unreliable narrator is always fun in like so many multiple genres too, that like you can for an unreliable narrator because like it's a part of the mystery too, right? It's a part of
Mm-hmm.
the it's a part of the fun to be like, is this, how do I interpret what this other person's telling me
Yeah,
versus how it could be like changed and misleading and all,
yeah.
making them look better.
It creates even more space for the reader to co-create the book,
Exactly.
like to because anytime you're reading, you're meeting that book halfway, that text
Yeah.
halfway with your imagination. So the unreliable narrator, sort of makes explicit that difference, right? Because there's the
Right.
text in front of you, and you're also like, how do I interpret this text, knowing that it's full of holes?
Right. And I mean, I have a good time with it. I have a good time reading it, watching it. It's always fun too. I always
Yeah.
think, whenever I think of like unreliable narrator in film, The Usual Suspects is just, I mean,
Oh yeah, of course.
sadly,
That's the
yeah.
mic drop of an ending, also,
I
right?
mean,
Yeah,
like, wow, the unreliable narrator is what makes that story just so
yeah,
elevates it. It was,
yeah.
no, there's some good ones. And on that too, can we talk about Francis, the saved,
Hmm.
the person who, maybe owes something to um
To Jeff.
Jeff. How was it writing that character? Because that's a character, kind of, I mean, a real person, but also fictionalized by Jeff's narration of it, right?
Right, right, right. So yeah, we're seeing everything we get of the story comes through Jeff. So
Mhm.
and then there are some, I guess, conventions in that world of
Mhm.
a first person narrator where, for instance, dialogue tends to be rendered faithfully.
Mhm.
You assume that the person telling the story is not making up the direct dialogue.
Yeah.
So so Francis does shine through in more ways than sort of filtered through Jeff. But Francis, part of the sort of Francis question is like, what if you save somebody's life and they're kind of an asshole,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Um, and but he's also sort of I don't know, semi-malignant but highly functional narcissist. We know
Yeah.
that these guys are everywhere in
Yeah.
leadership, especially in creative fields.
Yeah. I was like,
But
they're usually in charge. They're
yeah,
usually in
yeah,
charge.
and a lot of them, we see a lot of them in Hollywood, obviously, but
Mhm.
in the art world, which is a place where value is so subjective and so subject to manipulation. Sometimes these big personalities, if they're able to, if they're canny enough and they're smart enough, they're able to rise to the top and really sort of control and manipulate things. And that's where Francis is coming from. And Jeff becomes an art dealer in the end, a very successful art dealer. So there's a question. I don't think he becomes Francis, but there's to a certain extent he inherits some of those tendencies, probably.
Yeah, like, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say there's something like sort of almost animalistic about Francis. He is the guy who goes out pre-dawn and does an ocean swim. The reason that he's being saved in the first place. He is sort of like one of those sharks that can't stop moving forward or they die.
From that aspect, is he? This might be a messed up thing to ask. Like, is his death kind of not death, the accident, the trauma, the maybe close to death moment, kind of part of his character, kind of like inevitable thing from like his own personality of like being so like taking
as big a bite of the apple as he can, kind of
exactly
thing, like out of life. I guess I don't know. There are people like that, and they fascinate me. I would say there's to some degree you could say his excesses led to that heart issue in the ocean. But just in general, those kind of people, aside from the toxic workplace vibe, toxic relationship vibe, some of those people really fascinate me. People who have this sort of appetite or lust for life, this they just want to get as much as possible out of life while they're here, and screw everybody else. And
of course,
and it's just an interesting variation of Homo sapiens, right?
Yeah,
it's a type. It's not us, the book people.
No, we're all fine. We have no problems, right?
We just want to read all the books.
Just want to read all the books, and sometimes right, but like occasionally right. No, let's talk about the narrator. The narrator, like, why make the book from a person who isn't critical to the story, when you could have made it just Jeff, you know what I mean? Just Jeff telling it, but you have this person who is kind of not a fan of Jeff already.
Right.
Be the one to hear this story.
Well, it's an interesting question. I as I was working on this book, I was working on another book at the same time, and I was going back and forth and serially abandoning one for the other. And not just like, I think I'll work on this now, but like, screw this. This is done. Yeah. This doesn't work. I'm never going back to it. I'm driving my wife insane, right? She's just like, are you serious again? And I couldn't figure out how to make this one work. And it was just Jeff telling his story, all first person. And there was just something about his voice being up in the face of, up in your face, that I didn't like for some reason. My previous novel, Panorama City, has the conceit of it is that all of it is recorded onto cassette tapes. So it's like literally the voice of this narrator, and it's very sort of stylized voice, and it's really in your face. And there was something about Jeff's story that I just ended up feeling like it worked better at a remove. And I just experimented with putting, this ancient idea that I had about hearing a name over the PA from somebody from your past, which I found recently discovered was in a text file from like 2001. But that I just thought, let me put a narrator in between Jeff and the reader and see what happens. And it ended up creating a space where the book also becomes about storytelling in a way that I don't think it would have been if it was just Jeff. Then it'd be more sort of just unreliable narrator stuff, maybe. I'm not sure. But and at times that narrator is kind of a stand-in for the reader, like a little bit of a clue on how you should be interpreting or how you might interpret, or whether you're justified in questioning Jeff's story along the way. And to me, there's a paradoxical aspect of it. It's more artifice, right? This unnamed narrator in between. And I think for some people it actually turns them off. But for me, that extra level of artifice actually makes it feel more like it could be true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of where I'm headed in general with what I've been trying to write. I want stuff to seem almost like it could be true. And also that it leaves enough more room for the reader to exercise their imagination. That's where I am right now.
See, like that's interesting, because I saw it as like, oh, true or false kind of doesn't really need to matter in storytelling. It's the story.
Yeah.
Like the narrator is not going to be affected by the story, after it's the kind of beauty of storytelling, where it's like, it doesn't have to be true, or truth doesn't really matter in this scenario, because he's listening to a story. Maybe for Jeff it matters, but like, this is how Jeff's telling it. It's like Jeff's journey. It's everyone's perspective of like, what does truth mean to me versus truth to there's another book probably where like the narrator is stuck in an airport with Francis and hearing it from Francis's perspective too, which, listen, if there's a sequel, Mouth to Mouth to The Mouthing or something,
hand to hand
yeah,
there's a big fight scene. It's awesome.
I mean,
it's like a Mortal Kombat thing.
I think that there's a story here, so I'm just saying.
I think what I meant about like true though is the sort of real-time stuff that happens in the lounge. That's the stuff that I like the texture of that feeling, that no, we're just sitting in this static space and having this conversation. It just feels like something I don't know, felt right to me. And but then on the other hand, my first novel was a document, my second novel was cassette tapes, and this novel is as told to story. So maybe I just can't handle straight up plain conventional narration. I'm stuck in like the 1800s trying to get some kind of verisimilitude out of this was found in a box in an attic.
You were a traveling bard in your last life. You were just out there with the I don't know, what was an old time, a mandolin? No, some old time.
They had mandolins, or maybe I had a bouzouki in Greece.
And you were just like telling stories to people out there, and that's coming through in this, that's and that's storytelling. That's the beauty of storytelling. No, there's so many, I mean, and it makes, I feel like it gives a beauty in a way of saying this story, it's about listening to the story. It's not about trying to find fact. It's about listening to a story. And I think that, gives the reader freedom in a way. Freedom from the shackles of truth, the shackles of fact versus fiction. No, I mean, I think you handle that in a great way with the character of Jeff. Whether you like him or not, you're listening to the story, whether our narrator likes him or not, right? And I mean, would you put yourself in the persona of Jeff or the narrator? I know you said that you were in a situation where you had to be the Jeff, but do you think that like you were also, becoming the narrator in that way too, a person who's listening to a story like this?
Well, I mean, a lot of people have asked me, like, have you ever been sort of buttonholed like this and had somebody tell you this, a story like this? And I don't think I have, but we can all identify with some aspect of it, at a party where somebody's just going off and you're like, this is off. But I mean, identify with the narrator's kind of, he's he's a he's a writer looking to boost his career a bit because he got some nice notices in Germany. He's taking a break from carpooling groceries and stuff like that. That part I identify with 100%. Not being in the first class lounge and wanting to be in it. Yeah. Check.
Right.
However, the narrator is not able to sleep on airplanes, and I am, so it's not me. But I mean, identify with the narrator and I identify with Jeff. The sort of a lot of the Jeff stuff. I approached writing it, I don't know, in a spirit of sincerity to some degree. So
No.
yeah.
And I mean, I feel like that from all of these aspects, that comes through. That I mean, readers, I'm guessing readers will feel that while reading your book. Well, sadly, we're out of time. But before we go, is there anything you would like to say to, readers? You're a big LA writer, so the LA bookstore scene. Is there anything you'd like to say to them? The booksellers too.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I feel like we had a store here called Dutton's in Brentwood that was great and is gone, and so people lament the loss of that store and Midnight Special on the 3rd Street Promenade. There's sort of like there was a period where everybody was lamenting the loss of independent bookstores because Barnes and Noble was taking over. But it feels like right now the independent bookstore is having the last laugh, and I just like picture this mental archipelago from like Pages down in Manhattan Beach up to Diesel in Brentwood over to Book Soup, and then to SKYLIT and then to Vroman's. And I just think we're so lucky to have these stores that that are not just bookstores and not just sort of well curated collections of staff picks and stuff like that, but they do feel like community centers for people who are genuinely interested in writing. So I don't know. I feel like it's a very good time for books in Los Angeles, even if the weather is funky.
The funky weather honestly brings you into bookstores more. I feel like it makes you.
That's true. That's one of the difficult things. I should say one of the difficult things about writing in LA is if you're sitting in your office and you got to go, do 3 hours on your book and then you got to read something else or something. You just get anybody who has to work in the city. You look out the window and you just feel like it's beautiful out there. I kind of want it to be raining so that I feel like I have to be like I'm not wasting something by being behind my desk.
Rainy days are the best in LA. I mean, the 6 rainy days we get a year,
right?
They're the best because I'm like, oh, I don't have to go outside. Thank God, I don't have to step outside and immediately spend $1,000 a day, or I could stay at home and eat that food that's rotting in my fridge, I guess.
The other since we're doing the weather podcast, the other weather related thing I would add is that it's been great being a surfer in Los Angeles because you really get a sense for the seasons. And there are ways in which you can live in this city and not pay attention to the seasons at all, except for the few cold days in February. But if you surf, the swell direction changes throughout the year, the winds change, the water temperature changes quite a bit. So an engagement with the ocean feels like a real engagement with nature in that sense, and you really get a sense of that it's not just 72 and sunny permanently.
Well, since I have an expert on the water here, when is and this is listeners, this is a special treat for you too. When is the best time where the water's not, so cold? I feel like the Grim Reaper is pulling me down into the ocean. When is
usually August?
I
think it takes a while for the water to warm up. And so I don't know, I feel like August is the best time at the beach because people have also like decided, or even like late September, after Labor Day, people decide to not go to the beach anymore and it's a lot less crowded and warmer. But just keep an eye on if any south swells coming through, they sometimes bring warmer water up the coast a little bit. And probably the worst time is if it's been windy all night. That does something called upwelling and brings the water from below up. And so if it's been windy all night, it's just going to be colder.
Oof, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
That's a tip to all of us listeners, wherever you are. If you come to LA, so God, what if this podcast caused like a huge tourism swell in August and September in LA?
Oh man, I would not be happy.
No,
I blew it. I'm not going to name any spots.
We're not going to go that too. You know what? That's fair.
Yeah,
keep those close to the chest. No, thank you so much, Antoine. This has been such a great episode. This has just been a great conversation. To the listeners,
thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. No, listeners, go buy Mouth to Mouth on sale now at your local independent bookstore, but also SKYLIT Books. You can go and get it at SKYLIT if you're close by. Who knows? You might see some signed copies around. Oh,
they are. I get in the car now and then sign some stock.
You're just a traveling sign. You just show up whenever the wind calls.
I was at the airport. I was just touring in January. I actually stopped at the little stand at the airport, and they had my book. So I literally stopped and signed the stock at the airport. And some lady standing next to me was like, "What are you doing? Oh, is that your book?" And I literally sold 2 copies at the airport, hand selling my own book. So that's honestly that's where I am.
A bookseller and a writer. Wow. I mean, you deserve that. They should have sent you a paycheck after that. Like that's right. That's some good book selling right there. No, thank you again. This has been fantastic. Thanks, to our listeners, you have a great, beautiful rest of the day. If you're in LA, stay warm. It's warm weather's on its way, I hope. But you guys have a good day and do something really nice for yourself today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.